This is the last will and testament of me, Peregrine Danby, of Aldringham House, in the parish of Aldringham, in the county of Suffolk, Esquire, being of sound mind, memory, and understanding, and made this 14th day of September in the year 1817. I give, devise, and bequeath unto Lavinia Standish, spinster, now or lately of the parish of Peasenhall, in the said county, only surviving child of the late Reverend Edwin Standish, clerk, all that my messuage or dwelling house called Aldringham House, with the stables, offices, gardens, orchard, and walled ground thereto belonging, together with the several closes of arable, pasture, and heath, containing, by estimation, 219 acres, and all my books, papers, instruments, journals, and printed volumes without exception, and the residue of my personal estate in the public funds, after payment of my debts, and the legacies hereinafter named. And I declare that I make this gift freely, in my right mind, and for reasons which are my own, and which I have set down elsewhere in my own hand, and I desire that no person shall trouble her upon it. Mr. Penlow laid the sheet down upon the green baize, and took his spectacles off, and in the pause the fire in the grate of his chambers at Saxmundham put up one thin flame, and let it go again. There is a good deal more, he said, the legacies to the servants, the mourning rings, the direction concerning his instruments. But that is the substance of it, and I judged you had better hear the substance first. The young woman in the chair on the other side of the writing table did not move for the space of perhaps 3 breaths. She was 24, slight, upright, without stiffness, in a dove-grey gown some years turned, and a black ribbon at the throat that had been let out and taken in more than once. Dark chestnut hair, dressed simply, hazel eyes that had been fixed upon the solicitor's face throughout the reading, and had not once gone to the window. "Mr. Penlow," she said, "you will forgive me. I do not know the gentleman's name. You do not know it now, ma'am? I did not know it this morning, and I do not know it at this moment. I have heard it, but I have no acquaintance to attach to it. I have never met Mr. Danby. I have never had a letter from him. I have never, to my knowledge, stood within a mile of his gate. I keep the school at Peasenhall. I am the daughter of a curate who is 2 winters dead. My whole estate is a box of books, my mother's work-box, and £11 odd in the savings bank at Halesworth." "Yes," said Mr. Penlow. "Then you must tell me how a stranger comes to leave me his house." The solicitor was a man of 62 in plain black superfine gold-rimmed spectacles, 33 years at the same desk. He had read a great many wills to a great many people, and he had seen most of what a will can do to a face. He had expected tears, or a laugh, or the flat blank look that comes when a person cannot make the words fit the room they are sitting in. He had not expected to be asked a question, and he found that he liked it. "I cannot tell you," he said. "That is the plain truth, and I would rather say it at the start than have you find it out at leisure. Mr. Danby instructed me by letter in the September of last year. He was particular, he was exact, and he was well. He named you as I have read you, with the parish, with your late father's name and style, and with a note in the margin of his instructions that if the young lady should have married since the spring, the gift was to stand to her regardless of what name she then went by. I asked him, as I am bound to ask, whether the lady was known to him. He wrote back one line. What was the line? Mr. Penlow turned the papers, drew out a half-sheet, and held it a little away from himself in the manner of a man whose arm has grown longer than his sight. She is not known to me, I am known to her, though she does not know it. That is enough for the purpose." Lavinia Standish sat very still. "Read it again, if you please." He read it again. She looked past him then for the first time. At the window, at the rain that was not quite falling over the marketplace at Saxmundham, and at a carter's boy under the awning of the corn merchants with his coat over his head. Out beyond the roofs the wind was in the east and had been for 4 days, and she knew what 4 days of east wind at the end of the first week in April meant for the birds, because she had written it down every year since she was 14. Mr. Penlow, was there a physician at his death? There was. Mr. Charnley of Leiston attended him, and Mr. Charnley will say, and has said to me, that he was clear to the last week, and clear in the last week also, only tired. He died upon the 11th of March, in the morning, in his own chair, in his own library, with the window open. That is the whole of it. Then I am not to think the gift was made in confusion. You are not, and I would not have troubled you if I had thought so. But I am obliged to tell you the rest, ma'am, and I would rather do that now as well. He set his spectacles back upon his nose. There is a nephew. Outside the wind moved the awning, and the carter's boy shifted with it. Sir Osbert Trenholme, said Mr. Penlow, son of Mr. Danby's late sister, a baronet in his own right by his father, of Chelmore Lodge in the county of Essex, and of an address in Jermyn Street when he is not at Chelmore Lodge, which by my information is most of the year. He has entered a caveat at the registry. That is a formal step which prevents probate being granted while the matter stands, and it obliges the executor to prove the will in the ordinary way. I am the executor. I shall prove, but you will hear from him, and you will hear things said, and I will not have you hear them for the first time from a stranger in a shop. What does he say? He says 2 things, and he says them in the same breath, which ought to be a comfort to us, because they do not agree. He says his uncle was of unsound mind these 3 years past, and he says that no such person as Lavinia Standish was ever known to his uncle, and that the name in that paper is a fiction or a fraud, put into an old man's head by persons about him. He has employed a barrister named Pringle. He has written to the vicar of Aldringham. He has written to me twice, once civilly. She was quiet for a moment. Mr. Penlow, you have been very good, and I am going to say something that will sound ungrateful. If the gentleman was in his right mind, then he had a reason. I should like the reason more than I should like the house. The solicitor looked at her over the spectacles for rather a long time. He wrote that he had set his reasons down elsewhere in his own hand, he said. I have not found them. His papers are considerable. There are, by Mrs. Tetlow's count, upward of 400 bound volumes in the library, and a cabinet of manuscript which was locked when I went over, and I did not open it, having no direction for it. If the reason exists, ma'am, it is in that house, and the house is yours from the moment I have proved the will, and I would take it kindly if you did not go looking for it alone with a candle. For the first time, something moved at the corner of her mouth. I have kept a school for 6 years, she said. I am not sentimental about candles. She walked back from Saxmundham, because the carrier did not go until 4, and because she wanted the road. It is 5 miles and a piece from the marketplace to Peasenhall by the Yoxford turn, and the hedges were only just out of the grey. and the blackthorn was over, and the whitehorn not yet come. And at the ford below Sibton she stopped, without meaning to, and stood listening with her head a little turned. There was nothing yet. It was the 10th of April. In the year the harvest failed, she had heard the first swallow over the mill dam on the 7th, and in the 2 years after that, on the 15th and the 12th, and last year, when the east wind hung about all month exactly as it was hanging about now, on the 19th, which was the latest date she had ever set down, and which she had underlined twice, because the underlining was the only way she had of showing that she had been made to wait. She took the almanac out of her pocket. It was a cheap printed thing, the sort sold at Ipswich for 9 pence with the fares and the tide tables and a page of physic in the back, and it had been rebound twice by a bookbinder at Halesworth, who did it for nothing, because she taught his daughter. Every margin of it was written on, not in a scrawl, in a small even hand that ran along beside the printed days as a footpath runs beside a road, and where the margin gave out the writing went up the side of the page and turned the corner and came back along the top, and where a year had been full she had sewn in a leaf of paper of her own. She wrote, standing at the ford with the book against her forearm. 10th April. Wind east, 5th day. No swallow, no cuckoo. Blackthorn over at Sitton, whitehorn not out. Cowslips full in the churchyard bank, and in the lane by the smithy, but not in the meadow, which is late. Rooks feeding on the plough at noon. Then she put the book away and went on, and did not think about the house at all for a quarter of a mile, and then thought about it steadily for the remaining 4. The school at Peasenhall was 2 rooms at the back of the vestry, given by the parish and mended by whoever felt like mending it, and it held 19 scholars in winter and 11 in summer, because in summer there is work. She had it from her father. He had begun it in a way that made the churchwardens uneasy, which was by teaching the boys and the girls in the same room and at the same hour, and when he died the churchwardens had discussed the matter for 3 meetings and had then left it as it was, partly because no one else would do it for the money, and partly because Miss Standish had a manner of agreeing with everything a churchwarden said, and then doing what her father had done. She lodged with Mrs. Wynyard in the cottage by the smithy, 2 rooms up, the use of the copper on a Monday, and a shelf in the front room which held her father's Hebrew grammar, his Selborne, her mother's workbox, and 9 years of almanacs tied in 3 bundles with tape. Mrs. Wynyard was 68, and had buried a husband and a brother, and had a great deal of opinion left over. Well, she said, when the door had been shut a while, and the account had been given, and what did you say to him? I asked him how it came about. You never asked him what it was worth. I did not think of it until I was at Sitton. Then think of it now, and I will tell you, for I have been up that road with the fish cart these 40 years, and I have seen the roof of it. 200 acres in Aldringham is not 200 acres in Peasenhall. It is heath and sand and rabbit, and a deal of it will not fatten a goose. But the house is a good house, and there is timber, and there is the walled ground, and there is whatever the old gentleman had in the funds, and the lot of it together will keep a woman without her going out in the morning to hear 19 children spell. She set the kettle back, and your face has gone as it goes when the boys are at their tables, and you are counting to see who is only moving his lips. There is a nephew, said Lavinia. Ah, said Mrs. Wynyard with enormous satisfaction. Now we are at it. She lay awake that night, and what kept her awake was not the house, and not the nephew. It was a sentence. I am known to her, though she does not know it. She turned it over the way you turn over a word in a language you had once and have let go. She had been in the parish since she was 7. She had taught in it since she was 18. Her acquaintance was the vicar, the churchwardens, the smith, the Wynyards, the bookbinder at Halesworth, the schoolmistress at Yoxford who was her particular friend, 40 families of parishioners, and 100 and some children over 6 years, of whom she could still name every one. There was no gentleman of Aldringham anywhere in it. There was no gentleman at all in it, unless you counted the vicar, who was 71 and deaf on the left. But somewhere far back in the part of memory that has no dates attached and therefore, to a woman who dated everything, felt slightly disgraceful. There was a thing that would not come forward and would not go away. She got up in the dark and lit the candle after all, and untied the oldest of the 3 bundles on the shelf. The almanac for the year she was 15 was the worst kept of them. The hand was rounder, and the ink was 2 colors, and there were 3 whole weeks in June with nothing in them at all, which she remembered was the fever, and after the fever the writing came back smaller and more careful, as though she had decided something while she was ill. At the 23rd of April, in the round hand, was written, Cuckoo. Heard in the alder car behind the mill, before 8 in the morning, and again at noon. Note, the printed calendar puts the cuckoo at Aldringham on the 17th in every year, which cannot be, for the 17th is a printed date, and the bird is not a printed bird. Underneath, in the smaller and more careful hand that had come after the fever, and therefore written months later, was a single line she had no memory of writing. He answers. He says I am right and he is sorry for it. She sat on the edge of the bed with the book open on her knees and the candle guttering in the draught under the door, and outside the wind went round at last into the south, 3 hours before daylight, on the 11th of April, which she would afterwards write down. She said nothing about it at the school. There were 19 that morning, which was more than she had looked for so near the sowing, and she had them at their spelling, and then at the map of the county which she had drawn herself on the back of an old bill of sale, with the rivers put in with a brush, and the market towns marked with a dot, and the little boys allowed to hold the ruler, if they had been good. It was Miss Forsett who got it out of her, and Miss Forsett got it out of her by the direct method, which was to walk over from Yoxford at 3 in the afternoon and say, in the doorway, without taking her bonnet off, the bookbinder's wife has told the smith that you have been left a mansion, and I have walked 4 miles to hear you deny it. I cannot deny it, said Lavinia. It is not a mansion. How many rooms? I have not the least idea. Then it is a mansion, said Miss Forsett, and sat down on the low bench meant for the youngest children with her knees up somewhere near her chin, and looked so absurd there that both of them laughed, and the laughing did Lavinia more good than anything had done since the green baize table. Miss Forsett was 30, thin, sandy, with a temper on her and a genius for arithmetic she had had no chance to use anywhere but in a schoolroom, and she had been Lavinia's friend since the year they were both left to it. She heard the whole thing without once interrupting, which cost her a great deal. 2 questions, she said at the end. First, do you believe the old gentleman knew what he was about? His solicitor believes it. His physician believes it. That is not what I asked. Lavinia turned the chalk over in her fingers. I believe he knew exactly what he was about, she said. I believe he knew it 14 months before he died and wrote it down in a form no one could argue with. And I believe he expected to be argued with, or he would not have added that last sentence about no person troubling me. He was not a confused man. He was a careful man who had done something odd on purpose. Good, said Miss Fawcett. Second question, what are you frightened of? I am not frightened. Lavinia, I am frightened, said Lavinia, that when I find out why, it will turn out to be a mistake. That he meant some other Standish, that there is a girl in Norfolk who is the right one, and I shall have to go and tell her, and give it back, and come home, and hear about it in this parish for the rest of my life. Well, said Miss Fawcett, that is a great deal better than being frightened of the mansion. The letter from Chelmore Lodge came on the Saturday, which was the 18th. It was on thick paper, and the seal was a large one, and the hand was round and confident, and ran downhill toward the right on every line. Madam, you will readily understand that the extraordinary provisions of a paper purporting to be my late uncle's will have occasioned the greatest distress to his family, of which I am the sole surviving member, and have been these 11 years. I do not for a moment suppose that you are the author of what has been done. A young person in your situation, keeping a village school and dependent upon the goodwill of the parish, is not the mover in such matters. She is the instrument of others, and I am willing to believe you the innocent instrument. But you will see that the thing cannot stand. My uncle had not been himself since the winter of the year 15. His memory failed him upon names in particular. Persons about him took advantage of it. I have entered a caveat, and the matter will go before the court, and it will be expensive, and it will be public, and it will be talked of in every parish between Halesworth and Ipswich, and I put it to you plainly, madam, that a schoolmistress cannot afford to be talked of. I am therefore prepared, purely as an act of kindness, and without admitting the smallest right in you, to pay you the sum of £400 upon your executing a disclaimer of all interest under the paper. £400 is more money than you will see in your life. Consider it. I shall call upon you when I am next in the county. Your obedient servant, Osbert Trenholm. She read it twice, and the second time she read it standing at the window, because there was a bird moving in the pear tree in Mrs. Wynyard's garden, and she wanted to be sure of it, and it was only a chiff-chaff, which she had already had on the 2nd. Then she sat down at the table where the copybooks were stacked and wrote her answer, and made 2 fair copies, one for Mr. Penloway and one for herself, which was a habit she had learned from her father and had never once regretted. Sir, I thank you for your letter, which I have read with attention. You are correct that I am not the author of what has been done. You are correct that I keep a village school. You are mistaken in supposing that I am the instrument of any person. No one in this parish knew of your uncle's intention before the 10th of April, myself least of any, and if you will apply to Mr. Penloway, he will show you that he informed me upon that day and not before. As to your offer, I decline it, and I decline it now rather than later, so that you may be spared the expense of repeating it. I have never met your uncle, and I do not know why he did what he did. Until I know, I shall not sell a thing I do not yet understand. If it should appear that he was mistaken in me, I will give it up without an hour's argument and without a penny asked. If it should appear that he was not mistaken, no sum you name will make the smallest difference to me. I am, sir, your obedient servant, Lavinia Standish. Mrs. Wynyard, who had been given the letter to read while the wax was warming, put it down and said, "That is a very rude letter. It is a perfectly civil letter. It is the rudest letter I have seen in this house, and I include the one from the tithe man." Mrs. Wynyard was enormously pleased. "You will want your good gown mended." She went on the last Tuesday in April, and she went in a hired chaise, which she had never in her life done, because Mr. Penloe wrote that the executor's assent was given, and that she was to take possession, and that a woman arriving at her own door in the carrier's cart along with the fish would be a thing talked about for 20 years in a manner that would not help her. It is a matter of 12 miles or so, from Peasenhall to the sea by Yoxford and Darsham, and the road goes out of the heavy land into the light, and the hedges thin, and the fields open, and about Darsham the sand begins to come up through the grass at the edges of things, as the grey comes up at a man's temple. And then there is heath, gorse in full yellow that last week, in April, bracken not yet up, and all of it lying flat and wide under a sky, with nothing to stop it between there and Holland. She had the window down the whole way. She heard a cuckoo at Darsham at some distance, going away east, and she got the almanac out with the chaise still moving and set down the date and the place and the hour against it, and the postboy, glancing round, formed the opinion that his fare was writing to somebody, and thought no more about it. Aldringham House stood a half-mile back from the Leston Road, behind a belt of pine that had been planted for the wind and had done its work slantwise, red trunks, all leaning one way, and beyond them the drive turning once and then opening. It was not a mansion. Miss Fawcett would have been disappointed. It was a long, low, decent house of dark red brick gone rosy, where the weather took it. 2 stories and an attic under a tiled roof with 3 dormers, a stone porch in the middle with an unornamented pediment, sash windows in white frames set wide apart, and a good deal of glass on the south side, where somebody 100 years before had thrown out a room and glazed it end to end. The gravel had been raked that morning. There was a bay tree in a tub on either side of the porch, and one of the tubs had been mended with a hoop of new iron that was still bright. 3 people were waiting at the door, and had plainly been waiting some time. "Miss Standish," said the woman in the middle. "I am Mrs. Tetlow. This is Mr. Ruddock. This is Mr. Locke, who has the farm." Mrs. Tetlow was 60, in dark bombazine, with a white linen cap and a ring of keys at her waist, and a face that had been composing itself all morning and was not going to be caught out now. Mr. Ruddock was older, black tailcoat, white cravat, 35 years in the house. Mr. Locke was 50 and brown, and had come in his working coat with his hat in his hand, and had not been able to do anything about his boots. Lavinia got down and stood on the gravel and looked at the 3 of them, and found that the sentence she had prepared in the chaise, which had been a good sentence, had gone out of her head entirely. "I am very glad to meet you," she said. "I am afraid you have all had a wretched 6 weeks, and I am afraid I am the beginning of a 7th. Mrs. Tetlow, I have never had a house. You will have to tell me a great many things, and you will have to tell them to me twice." There was a pause about the length of a breath, and then Mrs. Tetlow's face let go of whatever it had been holding. "Then we shall begin with the passage, ma'am," she said, for it is cold, and you have come off the heath. The inventory Mr. Locke gave her that evening in the little room off the hall, with the estate book open and his finger going down the page, was this: 219 acres, of which 61 arable in 5 closes, 40 pasture and the marsh piece, 90 heath in 3 sheep walks, let to a Leston man at a rent that had not been raised in 19 years, the remainder being wood, the pine belt, the walled ground, the orchard, and the house. 1,400 and some in the 3%, a team of 3 horses, 2 cows, a boar. 460 odd bound volumes, which was Mrs. Tetlow's count, and which proved afterwards to be low by more than 100. Wages owing to nobody. Debts to a wine merchant at Ipswich, a bookseller in the Strand, and the smith at Nodershall, and to no one else in the world. He owed nothing, said Mr. Locke, and he was owed nothing, and he would not have it otherwise. He used to say that a man who is owed money begins to think about the man who owes it, and he had other things to think about. What did he think about, Mr. Locke? The steward considered the page a moment. Birds, ma'am, he said. Weather, and the 2 of them together. That night she did not go into the south room, though the door stood open and the last of the light was in it, because she had been given a great deal in one day, and she knew from 6 years of 19 children that when a person has been given a great deal, at once the sensible course is to stop. She went in the next morning, which was the 29th of April, at 7, with her hair still down her back and Mrs. Tetlow's shawl over her nightgown, and she stood inside the door a long while. It ran the whole south front, 40 feet of it, and it was glass from the waist up on 3 sides, and the sun came in and lay along the boards in long slabs. Shelves to the ceiling on the inner wall, and the volumes upon them not handsome, most of them but used, quarter calf, paper labels, some of them rebound in the same cheap fashion her own almanacs had been rebound, a long table down the middle with a green cloth, a brass telescope on a tripod at the east end, capped, a weather glass and a thermometer screwed to the frame of the middle window, with a folded card beside them and a pencil on a string. And under the eaves outside, where the glass met the brick, 4 house martins' nests of last year, and 2 birds already at the nearest of them, going in and out, and looking at the state of it, and making up their minds. She watched them the better part of 10 minutes, without moving. Then she went to the long table, and looked, and found what she had known she would find: journals, uniform, quarter calf, paper labels, on the shelf nearest the middle window, at the height of a seated man's hand. She counted along them, and stopped counting at 40, and went to the end, and the last of them was a year old, and the one before it 2 years old, and the first of them, at the far left, low down, carried a label written by a young man. She did not take one down. Mrs. Tetlow found her there at 8:30 and said nothing whatever about the shawl. He sat in that chair, said Mrs. Tetlow, and he wrote in that book, every morning of his life before he ate anything. Sunday as well. When his hand was bad in the frost, he wrote with the pen tied on. I have brought your tea in here because I judged you would not come out of it. Mrs. Tetlow, who has been in this house since he died. The keys shifted at the housekeeper's waist. Sir Osbert came the day after the funeral, she said. He was very affable. He walked about this room with his hat on, and he asked me what the books were worth. And I said I did not know. And he said, no, not the printed ones, the written ones, and he put his hand on that shelf, ma'am, where your hand is now. And I said that Mr. Penloe had the keys of the house, and that nothing was to go out of it, and he laughed and said he was sure I was very faithful. And then he went away, and a man came on the Thursday. What man? He gave no name. A young man, respectable, in a gig, and he said he was employed to make a list of the manuscript, and he had a paper with him. But the paper was not signed. Mr. Ruddock stood in the porch, and I stood in the passage, and we told him the executor must write to us first. He was here perhaps 4 minutes. He looked in at that window from the terrace before he went. Mrs. Tetlow's chin came up 1/2 an inch. I had Mr. Locke's boy sleep in the passage a fortnight after that, and I care nothing for who thinks me a foolish old woman. Lavinia took her hand off the shelf. Mrs. Tetlow, she said, where is the key of the cabinet? That, said Mrs. Tetlow, I was told to give to you and to nobody else, and I have had it in my pocket since March, and it is the heaviest thing I ever carried. The cabinet stood at the west end of the room between 2 shelves, mahogany, 4 foot high, with a full front and a brass escutcheon worn bright by a thumb. The key was a little one on a loop of faded green ribbon, and Mrs. Tetlow put it into her hand and then went and stood by the middle window, with her back turned, looking out at the Martins, which was the most tactful thing anyone had done for Lavinia in 2 years. Inside there were 9 drawers and a well beneath them. The drawers held correspondence, docketed. She had expected disorder, because she had been told all her life that gentlemen who keep collections are untidy men, and this was not untidy. It was the work of somebody who had had a system for so long that the system had stopped being a labor. Each bundle tied with tape, each with a slip in the same hand. Norwich, Bury, Ipswich. Printers, the Society. London, Mr. Sowerby. Weather, Orford Ness. Enquiries answered 1809. Enquiries answered 1810. She did not untie any of them. She had come to the room in her nightgown and a borrowed shawl, and it had seemed a small thing when the door was shut. It did not seem a small thing now, with a stranger's whole mind laid out in drawers under her hand. In the well at the bottom, alone lay a packet in stout brown paper, tied crosswise with red tape, and sealed at the crossing with black wax, and written across the face of it in a firm, upright hand, an old man's hand but not a shaking one, to be given to Miss Lavinia Standish of Peasenhall, into her own hands, and not to be opened by her, nor by any other person, until my will has been proved in. The ordinary course and the whole matter is at an end. She will do this because I ask it, and because she is the only person concerned in it who does not want anything. P. D. She read it standing. She read it again sitting down, in the chair at the middle window, which she afterwards understood had been the one he used. Mrs. Tetlow, she said at last, come and look at this, if you please, and then I shall want Mr. Ruddock to look at it, and afterwards I shall want you both to say what you have seen to Mr. Penloe. Mrs. Tetlow came and looked at it. Mr. Ruddock was fetched and looked at it, holding it at arm's length, and said, without any hesitation at all, that is the master's hand, ma'am. And that is the master's wax, and the seal is his own, for it has the swift upon it, and no other gentleman in this county seals with a swift. Thank you. Neither of you is to leave me alone with it. The butler's eyebrows went up perhaps 1/16 of an inch. Ma'am, if a gentleman comes into court in 3 months' time and says that I opened that packet in private and put into it whatever suited me, I should like 2 people who have been in this room every minute to be able to say what happened. So the packet stays in the well, and the key goes back to Mrs. Tetlow, and Mr. Penlow shall have a letter this morning telling him that it exists, and that I have not opened it, and asking him whether he wishes it lodged at Saxmundham. There was a silence in the long glass room. He said, Mrs. Tetlow remarked, to the window rather than to anybody, that he did not know what she would be like, but that she would be careful, because her father had been careful, and carefulness runs. Lavinia turned round. He said that to you? When in the autumn, ma'am. When he was writing to Mr. Penlow. I thought at the time that he was talking of a niece. Mrs. Tetlow, did he never once say who I was? Never once, ma'am. The old woman folded her hands. And I never asked him. That was our way, these 30 years. He told me the day's business, and I told him the house's, and neither of us went round behind. Mr. Penlow rode over himself on the Friday, which was a thing he had not done for a client in 6 years, and stood at the long table with his hat under his arm, and looked at the packet in the well for a full minute without touching it. You are quite right, he said. Leave it. If it were opened now, Mr. Pringle would tell the court that the contents were manufactured after the caveat, and the court would not believe him. But the court would have to hear him, and I would rather it did not have to hear anything. Sealed and untouched, it is worth 10 times what it is worth opened. I shall take an affidavit from Mrs. Tetlow and Mrs. Ruddock this morning, describing the seal, and I shall describe it myself, and I shall put my own seal on a wrapper over the whole, and lodge the wrapper here, in this house, in this cabinet, because if I carry it to Saxmundham, he will say it left the premises. He looked at her over the spectacles. Miss Standish, have you had any legal instruction in your life? I have read my father's parish books and a treatise on the poor law that was left in the vestry by a curate who did not want it. Then you are better prepared than half the gentlemen who come to me, said Mr. Penlow, and it was so nearly a joke that they were both a little startled by it. He stayed to the middle of the day, and before he went he set out the shape of the thing, which was this. The nephew's case had 2 legs. The first leg was that the testator had been incapable, and that leg had to be broken with evidence of what the testator was like. The physician, the servants, the tradesmen, the bank, the letters. The second leg was that no such person as Lavinia Standish existed in the testator's knowledge, so that the name in the will could only have been put there by another's contrivance. That second leg, said Mr. Penlow, is the dangerous one, and I will tell you why. It is dangerous because it is nearly true. He did not know you. He wrote it to me himself. If we can only say that the 2 of you were strangers, then the question the court asks is, who told him her name? And the only answers on offer are that a servant told him, or a solicitor told him, and I do not intend to be the answer to anybody's question. There must be a third answer. Have you got one? The martins had begun on the second nest. She watched one of them come up under the eaves with a pellet of mud from the horse pond, and set it and go away again, and she thought about a round girlish hand and a smaller one underneath it. I have got the beginning of one, she said. I shall want a fortnight. You have until the 22nd of July. Do not be later than the 10th, or I shall be drafting in a hurry, and a solicitor in a hurry is a solicitor making a present to the other side. She began that afternoon at the left-hand end of the shelf, at the first of the journals, and she did not begin at the last, because she wanted to meet him in the order he had lived. The label on the first said, "A Naturalist's Calendar kept at Aldringham in Suffolk, begun at midsummer in the year 1776 by P. Danby, being then in his 19th year." The first entry ran, "This day put up a rain gauge of my own making in the walled ground, at the direction of my father, who says a man should measure before he opines. The gauge is of tin and will rust, so will I." She laughed out loud in the empty room, and then put her hand over her mouth and then took it away again, because there was nobody to hear her and the room was hers. It took her 11 days to go through 42 years, and she did not read every line, and she did not need to. A page a morning, most mornings, sometimes 4 lines and sometimes 40. Wind and glass and thermometer at 8. What was in flower? What was in the hedge and where? The first swallow, the first swift, the first cuckoo, the first nightingale in the alders, the last swallow, the day the fieldfares came off the sea, the date the marsh piece flooded, the date the ice bore, the date the mowers began, and what they were paid, deaths and births in the parish, set down in the same voice as the weather, without ceremony and without coldness. The year his father died, 1 line, my father died this morning at 10, in his chair being 81, and the wind southwest and mild. He had asked me to note the wind. The year he was 30 he wrote for a week from an inn at Yarmouth, in a hand that got worse and then better, and then a note, "A quarrel with my sister, upon a matter which will not be repaired, and which I will not set down, since I intend to be ashamed of my part in it before I am 50, and shall not want the particulars. There was a woman once in the year 1791, mentioned 4 times in 10 weeks and never afterwards. Miss C. came with her father. She knows the Vetches, and then in October, Miss C. is to be married in Hertfordshire. I said what was proper. She had my calendar of last year, and I have not asked for it back, and shall not. At the year 1801 he began sending to the printers at Ipswich. The county almanac had a page of natural occurrences at the back, which had been the same page, word for word, since anyone could remember, and he wrote offering to correct it, and the printer wrote back that the page was set in standing type and it would cost money to alter. And he wrote back offering to pay for the alteration himself provided his name did not appear, and the printer, who had never had such an offer in his life, accepted it. An observer at Aldringham, the corrected page was signed. Nothing more. Lavinia sat back in the chair. Her father had bought that almanac every year of her childhood for ninpence at the fair at Yoxford, and had let her have the old one when the new one came, and she had learned to write in its margins because paper was dear and margins were free. She went on with a card at her elbow, making a list. 1808. Wrote to the printers upon the cuckoo date, which they have printed at the 17th of April these 5 years, being an error copied from an error. They will not shift it. I am told the date is popular. 1809. The cuckoo page again. The printer sends me a letter he has had from a girl at Peasenhall who says the same thing I have said, and says it better, having heard the bird on the 23rd, and being able to prove it by 3 witnesses and a smith. 15 years old, he says, and the daughter of the curate there. She has offered to keep the date for him every year for nothing. He does not know what to do with her, and has sent her letter to me as a curiosity. Lavinia put the volume down on the green cloth very carefully, as though it might go off. Then she picked it up again. Answered the girl at Pisenhall. Have not signed my name, having no wish to be known in it, and having also no wish to have a clergyman write to me about his daughter's education, which I should be obliged to answer civilly. Told her she is right, and that I am sorry for it, since being right in this county is a slow trade. She did not go down to dinner. Mrs. Tetlow brought a tray at 8, and took it away untouched at 10, and brought another at past, and stood over her until she had eaten some of it, and Lavinia ate it, without knowing what it was, with her finger in the place. 1810. The Pisenhall girl again. She has sent me her whole year on 2 sheets, ruled with the wind for every date. There is a fever in that village, and her hand is altered from the fever, and she has gone on with the ruling all the same. I have sent her Selborne. If her father asks, she may say it came from the printer. She had that book. It was on the shelf in Mrs. Wynyard's front room at this moment, between her father's Hebrew grammar and the workbox. She had been 11 days in a house she owned, and it had not once occurred to her to send for her own possessions, and the only object in the world she had ever been given that had not been explained had been sitting under a widow's window in Pisenhall for 9 years, 1811. 9 letters from Pisenhall this year, and I have answered 9. She corrects me upon the Sandmartins, and she is right, and I have told her so. I begin to look for the post. 1812, in March, the curate at Pisenhall has written to the printer to ask who his correspondent is. Wishing, he says, to thank him. I have desired the printer to say that the gentleman is dead. This was ill done, and I knew it while I was doing it. But I am 54, and she is 18. And there is no way in the world for me to go on writing to her that would not at the second remove put a mark upon her in that parish. So it is finished. I have kept her letters. I shall keep the calendar, and she will keep hers, and that will have to do for both of us. And then, 5 lines further down the same page, in the same hand, on the same morning, wind northeast, cold, glass falling. No swallow. Set the men to the thorn hedge in the 4 acre. Lavinia read that page a great many times. It was the plainness of it that took her apart, not the kindness, which she could have borne, and not the loneliness, which she suspected he would have denied. It was that he had written down the end of the only friendship of his middle life, and then, without a break, without so much as a fresh line, had gone on to the wind and the hedge. Because the wind and the hedge were also true that morning, and a man who has kept a calendar for 36 years does not stop keeping it on the day his heart is uncomfortable. She got up and walked the length of the room and back twice. Then she sat down, and drew the card toward her, and wrote at the head of it, in the hand that had come after the fever, letters received at Pisenhall, 1809 to 1812, 15 or 16. Kept where, and underneath I have his answers. He has my questions. Neither of us ever had a name. Sir Osbert Trenholm came on the 14th of May, at noon, in a hired barouche with a pair, which was a good deal of carriage for a lane that ends at a heath. Lavinia had 2 minutes' warning, because Mr. Locke's boy came up the drive at a run, and she used them to send for Mr. Bromwell. Mr. Bromwell was the curate of the parish, 26, long, mild, extremely short-sighted, and possessed of the useful quality of being unable to look as though he understood a hint. He had called upon her on her second day, had discovered that she knew the Greek Testament rather better than he did, had been delighted instead of offended, and had come 3 times since to argue about it. He arrived at the porch at 4 minutes past noon with his hat on crooked and a bramble on his sleeve. "You wish me to stay in the room," he said. "I wish you to sit by the window with a book and say nothing at all, and afterwards to write down what you heard while it is fresh, and date it and sign it." "Ah," said Mr. Bramwell, with great satisfaction. "A witness." "A clergyman," said Lavinia, who happened to be calling. Sir Osbert was 50, and had been a fine man at 30, and had let the intervening years do as they liked. Florid, heavy in the jowl, thinning sandy hair brushed forward, a plum-coloured tailcoat, a primrose waistcoat over a good deal of waistcoat's work, a quizzing glass on a black silk ribbon that he used not to see with but to punctuate with. He came into the hall as a man comes into a house he has already furnished in his mind, and looked up at the staircase, and along the passage, and at the barometer, and only then at her. "Miss Standish." "Sir Osbert." "This is Mr. Bramwell, our curate. Mrs. Tetlow, we shall have the tray in the south room, if you please." "Oh," said Sir Osbert, "I would not put the household about. My business is of 2 minutes. Then you will have made a long journey for it," said Lavinia, "and you shall still have the tray." He took the chair she gave him, which was not the chair by the middle window, because she had put her work-basket on it before he came in, and he looked about the long glass room with his chin up. "I have not stood in this room in 11 years, he said. "It is exactly as it was. Exactly, that is the point, you see, ma'am, and I say it without any ill nature at all. Nothing here has moved in 11 years, and neither had he. A mind that does not move is a mind that has stopped, and a mind that has stopped can be led anywhere by a person who is kind to it." "You have not been in this room in 11 years, said Lavinia. "Forgive me, I am not being clever. I am only slow, and I wish to be sure of the dates." 11 years. That would be the year 12, or thereabouts, the autumn of the year 7, if you want it exactly. "Thank you," said Lavinia, and did not write it down, and did not look at Mr. Bramwell, who had a book upside down in his lap, and was reading it with tremendous concentration. "You are wondering why I stayed away." Sir Osbert put out his legs and crossed them. "I shall be frank with you, because I have decided to be frank with you. My mother and my uncle quarrelled before I was breeched, and neither of them was the sort to mend a thing that was broken, and I was brought up to think of Aldringham as a house one did not go to. I do not defend it, it is how families are. But blood is blood, ma'am, and when the estate of the last Danby comes to be settled it is a hard thing for the last Trenholm to read the name of a schoolmistress in the paper." The quizzing glass came up and went down. I said 400 in my letter. I will say 600 in this room, and I will say it once. Sir Osbert, may I ask you a question before I answer that? A dozen, if you like. When did you last write to your uncle? The pause was not long. It was, however, a pause. I do not keep copies of my letters. Nor do most people, said Lavinia. I only wondered whether you had written to him after your mother died. Mr. Penloe tells me that was 11 years ago also, and it seemed to me that if I had a brother, and I died, my son might write to him. I am not here to be catechized about my correspondence. No, you are here to tell me that your uncle's mind was gone these 3 years. She folded her hands in her lap. I have been in this house a fortnight, sir, and I have read every one of the 43 volumes on that shelf. The last of them ends 9 days before he died. The entries are daily. They are in the same hand at the end as at the beginning, only older. They give the height of the glass to 1/10 of an inch. On the 4th of February last, he corrected an error he had made in the January of the year 98, and gave the volume and the page. On the 20th of February, he set down the sums due to the mowers for the coming season, and they are right to a farthing, because I have checked them against Miss Locke's book. On the 2nd of March, he wrote that the frogs were in the horse pond 11 days earlier than the mean of the last 40 years, and that he did not trust his own thermometer and had sent to Ipswich for another, and the new thermometer came on the 9th of March, and it is in the packing straw in the passage still, because he died on the 11th, and nobody has had the heart to open it. Sir Osbert's colour was up a little. A man may write a fair hand and be a fool in his affairs. He may. Your uncle owed money to 3 tradesmen at his death, and every account was under a 12-month. He had not signed a paper he did not read. He did not lend, and he did not gamble, and he did not buy anything but books, and I have his bookseller's bills for 9 years, and every one of them is ticked and initialed and paid. She let that sit for a moment. Sir Osbert, I do not say this to triumph over you. I say it because you will have to say the other thing in a court, on oath, to a judge who will have all of this put in front of him, and I think you should hear it in a comfortable room from a woman who is offering you tea before you hear it in an uncomfortable room from Mr. Penlow. Then you refuse 600. I refuse 600. And if I tell you, said Sir Osbert, and now the affability had thinned to about the depth of a sheet of paper, that when this comes to be talked of, the talk will not be about my uncle's mind at all. It will be about a young woman of 24 who was left a house and 200 acres by an old gentleman of 60 in a parish where she was not known. You have kept a school, ma'am. You know what a parish is. You will not be able to take a place as a governess afterward, whatever the court says, and courts say things very slowly. The room was quite still. Out under the eaves a martin went by the glass at the speed martins go. Mr. Bramwell, said Lavinia, without turning her head, will you be good enough to put the date at the top of your paper before you write that down, Sir Osbert? You have just told me that if I do not sell you my house for 1/3 of its worth, you will make my name unfit for me to earn my bread with. I want to be sure you meant to say it, because it is the sort of thing a man says in a temper and regrets in a chaise, and I am quite willing to let you unsay it. Did you mean it? Sir Osbert looked at the curate, who had turned his book the right way up and produced a pencil from somewhere in his person, looked back at him with the perfect open helpfulness of a young man who has not the smallest idea he is being intimidating. I meant, said Sir Osbert, that the world is unkind. Then we are agreed upon that much, said Lavinia. Mrs. Tetlow, Sir Osbert is not staying for the tray. Sir Osbert, before you go, your mother's portrait is in the room at the head of the stairs. It is a good one, and it is nothing to me, and I will not have it said that I kept a man's mother from him. Tell me where to send it, and it shall go at my charge, whatever the court decides, and if the court decides for you, you may consider that I sent it before I knew. There is also a mourning ring left to you by name in the will, which Mr. Penlow holds. It is yours whatever happens. He named you in it, sir. He did not forget you. He simply did not leave you the house. For a moment something went across the florid face that was not calculation and was not anger, and Lavinia, who had spent 6 years watching 19 children not cry, recognized it perfectly well, and had the decency to look at the window. "Send it to Chelmore," said Sir Osbert. He went out. The barouche took an unconscionable time turning on the sweep, and everyone in the house watched it do so from a different window. Mr. Bramwell wrote for 20 minutes at the long table, and signed it, and dated it, and then said, "Miss Standish, is it wrong of me to have enjoyed that? It would be wrong of you to say so to the bishop." "I shall say so to my mother," said Mr. Bramwell, who is a great deal worse than a bishop, and went away across the park with his hat still crooked. She wrote 3 letters that night. The first was to Mr. Penlow, with Mr. Bramwell's paper enclosed, and the 2 dates set out at the head of it, that Sir Osbert had stated, before a witness, that he had not entered the house since the autumn of the year 7, and that Sir Osbert had stated in writing that his uncle's memory had failed him upon names in particular these 3 years past. How, she asked, does a gentleman who has not seen a man in 11 years know what his memory did last winter? And from whom did he learn it? And would Mr. Penlow be so good as to ask that question in that order? The second was to the printers at Ipswich. She gave her name and her direction, and asked, without explaining herself, whether the house kept its letter files, and whether it retained any correspondence received between the years 8 and 12 relating to the natural occurrences printed at the back of the county almanac, and in particular whether any letters from a correspondent at Peasenhall had been preserved or returned to the writer, and she enclosed a shilling for the trouble of looking, and said she would pay whatever was proper. The third was to Mrs. Wynyard, and it was 4 lines long, and it said, "Send me nothing. I am coming myself on Thursday by the carrier, and I shall want the whole shelf. Have the tape ready. Do not let anybody wash the books." She went to Peasenhall on the Thursday, and it was the 20th of May, and the hedges she had walked past in the grey were unrecognizable. The school was Miss Fawcett's now 3 days a week, and would be somebody's altogether by Michaelmas, that had been arranged in April and had cost Lavinia more thought than the house had. She stood in the doorway of the vestry room for a while, and let the 11 who were there in May come and look at her and be shy, and then unshy, and then ask her whether it was true there was a telescope. And she said it was true, and that any child who could tell her the date of the first swallow at Peasenhall this year, with a witness, might come and look through it in the summer holiday. And there was an uproar, and Miss Fawcett thanked her with her eyes and cursed her with her mouth. At Mrs. Wynyard's she knelt down on the front room floor in her good gown, and untied 9 years of almanacs. And then she took down the Selborne. It was a plain copy, the 2 volumes in one, boards a little sprung, and she had had it since she was 16, and had read it until she could say pages of it. She had always known there was writing on the flyleaf. She had looked at it 100 times, and had never once been able to read more of it than her own name, because the rest was in a small, upright hand that ran over the top edge, and had been half sheared away by a bookbinder at Halesworth, who had rebound the boards for nothing, and had trimmed the block without asking, when she was 17, in the year 12. She carried the book to the window, for Miss L.S. of Peasenhall, who is right about the cuckoo, from a correspondent who is not dead, whatever the printer has told her father, and who has no business to say so, and therefore says it here where it will not be found for some ye the rest was gone. The binder's knife had taken the last line and a half clean off, and the paper edge was as smooth and as final as the edge of a table. Mrs. Wynyard, in the doorway with a cloth in her hand, saw her sit down on the floor beside the bundles of almanacs in the good gown, and had the wit to go out again and shut the door. The answer from Ipswich came on the 2nd of June, and was written by a young man who had plainly been given a dull errand, and had enjoyed it. Madam, our Mr. Grigson the elder never in his life destroyed a letter, a thing which has been the misery of this house for 40 years, and is now, it appears, of some use. The files for the years in question are entire. Upon that page we have 141 letters, of which 16 are signed L.S., and are directed from Peasenhall, the earliest bearing the postmark of the 29th of April in the year 9, and the latest that of the 3rd of February in the year 12. They are docketed in Misty Grigson, the elder's hand, in the manner of this house, with the date received and the disposal upon all 16 is the same 3 words, which are, sent to Aldringham. There are also in the file 11 letters from the gentleman at Aldringham himself, and one from a clergyman at Peasenhall, dated the 9th of March in the year 12, and our copy of the answer sent to that clergyman, which I have read, and which I shall not comment upon. We do not part with our files, madam, but Mr. Grigson the younger will attend anywhere in the county with them, upon reasonable notice, and asks me to say that he has been curious about you for 9 years. She read it aloud twice at the breakfast table, once to Mrs. Tetlow, and once to Mr. Ruddock, who had come in for the purpose, and who stood by the sideboard afterwards, clearing his throat at intervals. Then she went upstairs and took down from the top of the press the box that had been carried out of the parsonage at Peasenhall on the day of her father's funeral, and had gone to Mrs. Wynyard's, and had come to Aldringham in the bottom of the carrier's cart, and had not been opened in either place. Her father had been a curate for 31 years on £80, and had kept a copy of every letter he ever sent, because a clergyman who cannot prove what he wrote is a clergyman at the mercy of anybody who can remember it differently. The copybook was there. So were the answers, tied by year. 9th of March, year 12. To the printers at Ipswich. Sir, my daughter, who is 18, has for 3 years been corresponding through your house with the gentleman who furnishes your page of natural occurrences. She does not know his name and has never asked it, and I have not encouraged her to ask, holding that a man who wishes to do good quietly has a right to. But her letters have been the making of her mind. She rules her sheets. She checks her dates. She will not write down a thing she has not seen. I wish to thank him. If he does not wish to be thanked, I ask only that you tell him this, that a country curate with 1 child and no library has watched his daughter taught by a stranger through the post, and is grateful, and will say nothing further. And clipped to the copy, the answer in the printing house hand. Reverend Sir, we are desired to acquaint you that the gentleman who corresponded upon that page is lately dead, and that his papers are dispersed, and that no further letters can be forwarded. We are sorry to send so short an answer to so kind a letter. Lavinia sat on the floor of her bedroom at Aldringham, with her father's copybook open on her knees for a long time. He had been 54 when he wrote that lie, and had called it ill done in his own journal on the same morning, and had gone out afterwards to see about a hedge. Her father had folded the answer, and clipped it, and put it away, and had come downstairs, she now remembered with a clarity that arrived all at once and complete, and had said over the top of the fire, "Lavinia, your gentleman is dead." And she had said, and he had said, "We shall keep the calendar anyway." And she had kept it, every year since, for 9 years, for nobody. The cause was set down at Norwich for the 22nd of July. Mr. Penlow had a brief prepared that ran to 60 pages, and had a barrister of his own, a dry Norfolk man of 40, called Mr. Raisbury, who asked her 4 questions in June and 11 in July, and never once told her she was doing well, which she found she preferred. The proofs were laid out in the long room through the last fortnight, on the long table, under the glass, in the order they would be wanted, and everybody who came into the house was made to look at them, because Mr. Raisbury said that a case which cannot be understood by a housekeeper cannot be understood by a judge. There were the 43 journals, with slips of paper in 11 places. There was the file from Ipswich, which Mr. Grigson the younger brought over himself on the 8th of July, and would not leave behind, and which he sat beside for 2 hours, with the expression of a man visiting a relation in a strange county, 16 letters in a round girlish hand, going smaller and steadier through 3 years, docketed sent to Aldringham, in a dead printer's writing, 11 letters back in the upright hand, unsigned, and the 2 letters of March in the year 12, lying side by side. The curates and the falsehood. There was her father's copybook. There was the Selborne, with the flyleaf and the shorn edge, and Mr. Coleridge, the bookbinder of Halesworth, aged 69, who came in his good coat and identified his own trimming with the deepest professional shame, and said he had done it in the November of the year 12, and would remember it if he lived to be 100, since it was the only time in 50 years he had cut a young lady's book without asking her first. There were 9 years of 9-penny almanacs with their margins full, and there was in the well of the cabinet, wrapped and sealed under Mr. Penlow's seal over the black wax and the red tape, a packet nobody had opened. "Leave it there," said Mr. Raisbury, when it was explained to him. "If they ask what is in it, we say we do not know, and we say it in a manner which makes them wish they had not asked." The consistory court at Norwich sat in a chamber off the cloister with much dark panelling, and one window too high to see out of, and the July morning came down through it in a single slant, and fell across the table where the papers were. Sir Osbert Trenholme was there in a black coat, and had had his hair cut. Mr. Pringle was small, neat, 60, with a voice like a well-oiled hinge, and he began, as he was bound to, with the second leg, because the first leg had died quietly in the last week of June, when the physician's affidavit and the bookseller's bills and the thermometer in its packing straw had been served upon him, and everybody in the chamber knew it. He put it as high as he could. A testator of 60, a young woman of 24, no acquaintance, no visit, no introduction, no meeting, no witness in the world who had ever seen them in a room together. A name appearing for the first time in a solicitor's instructions in the September of the year 17, and a house, and better than 200 acres, and every book and paper without exception. It was, said Mr. Pringle, either the most extraordinary act of pure benevolence in the county, or it was contrivance, and courts, he said, were not established to admire the extraordinary. Then he sat down, and Mr. Raisbury got up, and Mr. Raisbury said that his learned friend had asked how a man leaves everything he has to a stranger, and that the answer was that he had never had the smallest intention of doing so, because the young lady in question was not a stranger, that she was, on the contrary, the only person on earth with whom the deceased had corresponded as an equal for 3 years of his life, that neither of them had ever known the other's name, and that the court would now be shown, letter by letter, docket by docket, postmark by postmark, in the hands of 4 separate persons of whom 3 were dead, exactly how that had come about. It took the better part of the day. She was called after the printer. She gave her name and her parish and her father's name and style, and Mr. Raisbury took her along the 16 letters, and she identified her own hand at 15, and at 16, and at 18, and said which of them had been written before the fever and which after, and how the fever had altered it, and the court had before it, at the same moment, the 2 volumes of almanac in which the same alteration appeared in the same month. Then Mr. Pringle rose to cross-examine, and he was civil, and he was patient, and he was very good at his work. He asked whether she had ever been in the house before the 28th of April. She said no. He asked whether she had ever received a letter signed Peregrine Danby. She said no. Never, not one. He asked whether she could produce a single sheet of paper written by the deceased and directed to her by name. She said that she could not, and that there was no such sheet in existence, and that if one were ever produced she would say at once that it was false. "You are candid, madam, I am accurate," said Lavinia. "The 2 are not always the same thing, and I should like the court to have the accurate one." He asked then the question he had been walking toward for 20 minutes, and he asked it gently, which was the proper way to ask it. "Miss Standish, you say you did not know who your correspondent was. You had his hand before you in 11 letters. You have told us you are a person who observes and compares. Do you ask this court to believe that in 9 years it never once occurred to you to find him out?" The chamber was quiet. The slant of July light had moved along the table and was on the corner of the Ipswich file. "It occurred to me every year," said Lavinia. Mr. Pringle waited. "It occurred to me when I was 18, when I was told he was dead, and I did not believe it for about a month, and then I did believe it, because my father believed it, and my father was not a man who was lied to often. It came back at 20, when I found I was still keeping the dates for somebody who could not read them. It occurred to me at 23, when my father died and I went through his papers, and I had that letter from the printers in my hand, sir, in the March of the year 15, and I put it back in the bundle, and I shall tell you exactly why, and it is not a credit to me. I put it back because if I had written to Ipswich and asked for his name, and they had given it me, then I should have been a schoolmistress of 23 writing to a gentleman's house to say, 'I believe your late father used to write to me.' And there is no way in this world to send that letter, sir, not from a village, not on £11 a year and a lodging, not without every servant in the house reading it before the master, and every servant in Peasenhall knowing I had sent it inside the fortnight." She stopped for a moment. He had exactly the same difficulty from the other end. He set it down in his book in March of the year 12, and the court has read it. He was 54, and I was 18, and there was no arrangement in the world by which that friendship could go on. So he ended it with a lie, and I accepted the lie. And we each of us went on keeping the same calendar in 2 different parishes for 9 years, without knowing the other was alive. And yet he left you his house. Yes, sir, why? Because I was the only person he knew, said Lavinia, who wanted nothing from him. He says so on the packet, which the court has not opened, and which I have not opened, and which I would rather be beggared than open before this is finished. Mr. Pringle looked at her for a moment over his papers. He was, whatever else he was, a barrister of 40 years' standing, and he had heard a great many witnesses say a great many things, and he knew the difference between an answer that has been prepared and an answer that has been carried about for 9 years and is now simply being put down. I have no further questions, he said. The court adjourned at 4. It never sat again upon the matter. In the passage outside, in the cool under the vaulting, with the clerks going by, Mr. Pringle spoke for a quarter of an hour with his client in a low voice, and Sir Osbert Trenholm's answers grew shorter, and at the end of it Sir Osbert stood looking at the stone floor and turning his hat slowly in both hands, a heavy man in a black coat, 50 years old, in a cathedral corridor a long way from anywhere he had ever been happy. The caveat was withdrawn by a paper served upon Mr. Penlow at 9 the following morning, and probate in solemn form was decreed to the executor on the 24th of July in 1818, and the costs went where they were bound to go. She did not see Sir Osbert again for 2 years. When she did, it was at a subscription concert at Ipswich, and he bowed, and she curtsied, and neither of them said anything at all, and that was all of it, and both of them were satisfied. The packet was opened on the 26th of July at 11 in the morning in the south room, with the glass doors standing open onto the terrace and the martins going in and out of all 4 nests, in the presence of Mr. Penlow, Mrs. Tetlow, Mr. Ruddock, Mr. Locke, and Mr. Bramwell, because she had made up her mind in Norwich that nothing about this business would ever be done by her alone in a room. Mr. Penlow broke his own wrapper first, and asked Mr. Ruddock to say again, aloud, that the black wax beneath was his master's seal with the swift upon it, and that it was whole. Mr. Ruddock said so. Mr. Bramwell wrote it down. Then Mr. Penlow cut the red tape and handed the packet to her and put his hands behind his back and walked away 4 paces and stood looking out at the terrace with the air of a man who has decided that his sight is not required. Inside there were 4 things. The first was a bundle of 16 letters tied with green ribbon, each one folded small and worn soft at the creases, and each of them docketed on the back in the upright hand, Peasenhall received, answered, and on the 16th, not answered, being the end of it. The second was a copybook, of the kind a merchant's clerk uses, in which he had written out fair copies of all 11 of his own letters before sending them, and which contained also 4 more, dated after the year 12, addressed to nobody, beginning "My dear Miss Standish," and ending, each of them, in the middle of a sentence. The third was a chart. It was on a sheet of cartridge paper, 2 feet by 3, ruled by hand, the years down the left side from the year 9 to the year 17, the dates across the top from the 1st of March to the middle of May. 2 rows to every year, the upper row in his upright hand, the swallow, the swift, the cuckoo, the nightingale at Aldringham. The lower row in the same round hand of a girl, grown steadily smaller and better. The same 4 birds at Piesenhall. She had never sent him the last 6 years of it. He had had 4 years of her dates from the letters, and then from the year 13 onward, in the lower row. The entries were in his hand and not hers, and beside each was a tiny mark she could not read until Mr. Penlow passed her the glass off his watch chain. Every one of them said the same thing in 3 letters. Alm. He had gone on buying the Ninpenny Almanac at the fair at Yoxford every year for 9 years, and had read her margins. The 4th thing was a letter, Aldringham, the 14th of September, 1817. My dear Miss Standish, if you are reading this, then I am dead, and my will has been proved, and somebody has probably given you a bad quarter of an hour, and I am sorry for it. I considered a great many ways of doing this, and all of them were worse. To have written to you while I lived would have been to hand you over to a parish. You know that as well as I do. And better, since you have had to live in one on £80, and I have only had to look at one out of a window. So this is the coward's way, and it is also, I think, the only way that leaves you with everything, and me with nothing to answer for. I shall set out the reasons, because you will want them, and because I told my solicitor they existed, and I have no wish to be found out in an untruth by a woman who checks her dates. The first reason is that you are right about the cuckoo, and were right at 15, against a printed page and a printer and a county, and had 3 witnesses and a smith. I have known perhaps 4 people in my life who would rather be exact than agreeable, and I am one of them, and my father was another, and the other 2 were you and a Dutchman I met once at Yarmouth. The second reason is the year of the fever. You were ill in the June, and your hand was spoiled, and you went on ruling your sheets. I have that year in front of me now. There are 3 weeks in it in a hand like a spider's, and not one date missing. I was 56 when I understood what that meant, and I sat in this chair a good while over it. The third reason is your father, who wrote to Ipswich in the March of the year 12 to thank a man he had never met, and who received a lie for his answer, and who was, on the evidence of that letter, a better man than I am. I have made no provision for his memory in my will, because there is nothing I can do for a dead curate that is not an insult. But you may take it that I have thought about him every March for 6 years. The fourth reason has nothing to do with any of that. I came to Piesenhall in March, in the year 15. I stood at the back of the church for your father's burial, and I went away again by the field path without speaking to a soul, and I am aware of how that will sound to you, and I am not going to defend it. You were 24, and you had £11 and a school, and a gentleman of 59 presenting himself at a funeral to say that he had been writing to you when you were 15 would have been a calamity, and would have been a calamity in a way that would have fallen entirely upon you, and not at all upon me. So I went home and did the only thing I could do, which was to write to Mr. Coleridge at Halesworth, who had rebound your almanacs twice for nothing, and to arrange that he should go on doing it for nothing for as long as you brought them to him, and to pay him for it quarterly, and to make him promise on his trade that he would never tell you. He kept that promise for 3 years, and he will be extremely uncomfortable when he reads this. Tell him from me that he is absolved. Now the estate. It is not a great deal. 200-odd acres, of which 90 will never be worth anything, and a house that wants a new roof over the kitchen within 5 years, and 1,400 in the funds, and the sum of it will bring you perhaps 300 a year if Locke is left alone and not improved upon by any man from London. It is enough that you will never again have to be pleasant to a churchwarden. I am leaving it to you rather than to my sister's son, for reasons that I would rather put plainly than politely, since he will read this in the end. Osbert has not been in this house since the year 7, and he did not come when I was ill in the year 15, nor write when I sent him word that his mother's grave wanted the stone reset, and I paid for it myself, and he has never asked what it cost. I do not hate him. He is what my sister made him, and she was what my father made her, and I did nothing to help either of them, and my share in it was to go on with my journals and say that families are a great trouble. He will have the mourning ring and his mother's portrait and whatever he can be persuaded to be satisfied with. He is not poor. He merely spends. But you will observe that I have left you the books and papers without exception, and by name in the will, and that is the part I care about. So attend. There are 43 volumes on that shelf, and they are of no value whatever, except that they are unbroken. 42 years, daily, 1 parish, 1 man, 1 thermometer that I did not trust at the end. That is not a monument, it is a measurement. And a measurement is only worth anything when it is set beside another. Yours at Piesenhall is 15 miles inland on the heavy land, and mine is 1.5 miles from the sea on the sand, and between the two of them a person with patience could say something true about this county that neither of them says alone. So here is what I am asking, and it is the only thing in this letter that is a request and not a gift. Join them, copy yours in fair, and mine, and set them side by side as I have begun on the chart, and go on keeping both for as long as you are able, and when you have 20 years of the two together, send them to the Society in London, which has been civil to me twice, and has printed nothing of mine, because I never sent them anything worth printing. Send it under both our names, and put yours first, since you will have done the work of finishing it, and I shall only have done the work of starting it. If you would rather not, then do not. Sell the house and buy an annuity and marry a sensible man and forget the entire business, and you will have my blessing for what a stranger's blessing is worth, which is nothing. But I do not think you will sell it. I think you will go out on the morning after you read this and look at the martins under the south eaves, because there are 4 nests, and they were 3 when I was a boy, and you will want to know when the 4th was built, and you will find that I have written it down. I am, Madam, your obedient servant, and your correspondent of the years 9 to 12, who is not sorry, at the end to have been dead for 6 of them if it kept your name clean in a village. Peregrine Danby. Nobody in that room said anything for some time. It was Mrs. Tetlow, in the end, who put her hand flat on the back of his chair and said, in a voice not entirely under management, "Well, he was a very obstinate man." "Yes," said Lavinia, "and he has had his way," said Mrs. Tetlow, which is what he was always after, and then went out of the room rather quickly, and was heard, through the open door, being obstinate herself with a housemaid in the passage about a thing that did not matter in the least. Mr. Coleridge, the bookbinder, was absolved by letter on the Monday, and wrote back 4 lines that had been over an hour in the writing. and thereafter whenever Lavinia came into his shop at Halesworth, he would take her almanac out of her hand without a word, and look at the state of the sewing, and shake his head at her exactly as he had done for 11 years, and neither of them ever mentioned it again. Which was the arrangement that suited them both. The chart was framed and hung between the two south windows, where the light was worst for it and best for looking at it, and Mr. Locke, who had never in his life been asked to look at a picture, stood in front of it for 10 minutes, with his hat in his hand, and then said, "That is the year the barley was drowned, ma'am, there, where your line and his go apart," and was so pleased with himself that he told his wife twice. The 4 unfinished letters she left until August, and then read on a wet afternoon with the glass doors shut and the rain going along them in ropes. The first was dated in the November of the year 13. Dear Miss Standish, you will have had a hard summer of it, for the hay was ruined here and I cannot suppose it was better inland, and I find myself wanting to know whether you had the corncrake in the low field again, since you had it 2 years together and I have never had it here at all. And the second was dated in the February of the year 15, 11 days before her father's funeral. Dear Miss Standish, I have this morning read in the Ipswich paper that the Reverend E. Standish of Peasenhall is dead, and I am sitting here at 8 in the morning with my hat already on my head like a fool, having got as far as the passage before I understood that there is no possible character in which I can. The third was dated in the June of the year 16. My dear correspondent, the Swifts went on the 11th, which is 4 days earlier than I have ever had them. And there is nobody in this county I can say that to and be understood, and I am aware that this is my own doing, and that I have said so before, and I do not know why I go on writing letters I do not send, except that a man must the 4th had no date at all. My dear Miss Standish, I have made my will. That was all. Half a line and then the rest of the page empty, and the corner of it foxed where it had lain 9 months against the side of the packet. She sat with the copybook open until the rain stopped, which was about 6, and then went out on to the wet terrace and stood there in her house shoes until Mrs. Tetlow came out with an expression of the deepest disapproval and a pair of pattens. He was writing to me for 6 years, said Lavinia. Yes, ma'am. And not sending it. Yes, ma'am. That will be why he burnt so much paper, said Mrs. Tetlow, for there was a deal of it, and never any smell of a bill in the grate, and I did used to wonder. She put the pattens down on the flags. Put those on, if you please, ma'am, and then wonder about it, for the wondering will go on a long while, and the shoes will not. She went over to Peasenhall in the last week of August, and it took 2 days, and it settled 3 things. The first was the school. She had thought of keeping it in her own hands and going over twice a week, and Miss Forsett told her in 11 words that this was vanity, and that a school kept by a woman who lives 15 miles off is a school kept by nobody, and that if she wanted to do a thing for Peasenhall, she should endow it and get out of its way. So it was endowed, £100 put by, and the interest to pay a mistress properly instead of by subscription and goodwill, and the vestry to appoint, and one condition written in by Mr. Penlow at her direction, which was that the school should take the girls on the same days and in the same room as the boys, in perpetuity, or the endowment should fall in. 2 churchwardens objected. The vicar, who was 72 now and deafer than ever, said loudly that it had been done that way for 30 years, and He did not see why anybody should change it merely because there was money, and the thing went through. The second was her father's grave, which is on the north side where the ground is cheap, and which had a plain stone and a hollow in front of it from the drip of the tower. She had the hollow filled, and the stone set straight, and nothing added to the inscription, because she went through 4 wordings in her head, standing there in the wet grass, and each was for her own benefit, and not for his. What she said instead, she said aloud and briefly, in the manner of a woman continuing a conversation which had been interrupted rather than begun, that the gentleman had not been dead in the year 12, that he had not been dead in the year 15 either, and had been at the back of the church on the day of the funeral, and had gone away by the field path, that he had been paying Coleridge for the almanacs ever since, and that she was not to be pitied about it, and neither was he, and that she was going to finish the calendar and put it into the world with both their names on it, and that she had thought her father ought to know, since he was the one who had written to Ipswich to thank a stranger, and had got a lie for it. Then she stood there a little longer and said that she was very well, and that there was a great deal of glass in the new house, and she had not yet got used to being warm in a room in the morning. The third thing was the smith. In the letter of the year 9, written at 15, she had said that she could prove the date by 3 witnesses and a smith. And she had named them, because at 15 she had believed that a name in a letter was worth more than a name in her own head, which is a thing most people learn at 40, if they learn it at all. 2 of the 3 witnesses were dead. The third had gone to Norfolk. The smith was alive. He was 81 and blind in one eye, and he sat in the doorway of the forge his son now worked. And when she said who she was, he said, "Curetti's girl at once, and then, you've been in the paper, I have. About a bird, about a great many things, but the bird is the part that mattered." The old man laughed until he had to hold on to the doorframe. "I've told that these 10 year," he said. "Nobody ever believed me. Little maid come running down here of a morning in her apron and made me stop the bellows and stand out in the lane and listen, and I said, 'That's a cuckoo,' and she said, 'Will you say so if you're asked?' And I said, 'Who's going to ask me?' And she said, 'A printer.' He wiped his good eye. Never was asked. Not till this minute." "You have been asked now," said Lavinia, "and if anybody ever asks you again, you may tell them that a court at Norwich has had the letter with your name in it read out aloud, and that a barrister from London had it in his 2 hands, and that it went against him." The smith thought about this for a long moment. "In front of a judge," he said, "in front of a judge, and a great many clerks, and a duke's man in the doorway who had come to see what the noise was about." "Well," said the smith. He sat back. "Well," he said again, and then said nothing else at all, and she sat with him in the doorway of the forge for a quarter of an hour, and the son came out twice to see what his father was being kept from, and went in again both times without saying anything. Miss Fawcett came to Aldringham on the 6th of September, meaning to stay 3 weeks. She stayed 11, and by the end of the first of them she had discovered that Mr. Locke's estate book had been kept since the year 98 upon a principle which nobody had ever written down, and which had been passed from steward to steward by word of mouth like a recipe, and that under this principle the 90 acres of heath had been let at the same rent through 2 wars and a doubling of the price of wool. She said so at dinner. Mr. Locke was sent for, and came in his working coat, and stood, and was made to sit, and defended his book for 40 minutes with real spirit, and was beaten at the end of it, not by argument, but by arithmetic set out in a column, which is a thing no honest man can go on disputing. "Well," he said at last, "I'm not sorry to hear it, ma'am, and I'm ashamed, and the two go together. But the Leaston man has had that heath since I was 30, and he has a lease. How long has it to run?" "Michaelmas 12-month. "Then we shall let him have it at the old rent to the end of his lease," said Lavinia, "and tell him now, this month, what it will be after, so that he has a year to arrange himself and cannot say he was surprised. And Mr. Locke, you will not be ashamed at my table. The book was kept honestly for 20 years, and it is worth more to me than it would have been if it had been kept cleverly. A clever book I should have to check." Mr. Locke went home and told his wife that too, in the middle of September the Martins began to go. She had never in her life been able to watch it properly, because at Peason Hall she had been in the vestry room with 19 children from 9 in the morning, and by the time the school came out the sky over the smithy was usually empty, and she had been reduced to writing down the day she last saw them, which is not the same thing, and which she had marked in her margins every year with a small, honest query. Here she could stand on the terrace at 7 in the morning with a cup of tea going cold on the balustrade, and watch the whole business, the gathering along the ridge tiles, the young ones being fed on the wing over the horse pond, the fidgeting, the numbers thinning day by day. She got the last of them on the 29th, at 3:30 in the afternoon, 2 birds going south over the pine belt, and she went in and wrote it down, and then sat for a while with the pen in her hand, 43 volumes on the shelf beside her, and each of them with that date in it, and the mean of the 43 worked out in the final volume in a hand grown old, and the note beneath, "The mean is a poor thing, but it is the only sentence a man can say to the next century." "Very well," said Lavinia, aloud, to the empty room, and drew a fresh sheet toward her, and began the fair copy that afternoon. The copy took her until the following June. 240 pages in a fair round hand, the 2 parishes side by side, every date checked twice, the gaps left honestly as gaps. Mr. Bramwell came on Tuesdays and read the entries aloud out of the old volumes so that she could write without looking up, and quarrelled with her cheerfully about whether a thing seen on the evening of the 12th ought to be entered under the 12th or the 13th, and lost, and came back the next Tuesday to lose again. And in the first week of October, in the middle of all this, the Society in London wrote back. The Society's secretary wrote that the papers of the late Mr. Danby of Aldringham were known to them by reputation, and had been asked for twice, and that the Society would be glad to see the joined calendar when it was ready, and that as it was not in the power of the Society to send anyone into Suffolk to look at 43 manuscript volumes, they had taken the liberty of mentioning the matter to a fellow who lived within a few miles of the house, and who had undertaken to call. The fellow's name was given in the last line as the Duke of Wenhaston. Lavinia put the letter down on the green cloth, and looked at it as she would have looked at a wasp on a windowsill. Mrs. Tetlow. What is at Bulcamp? A park, ma'am, and a house you could put this one inside 4 times, and about 300 people who all get their bread there, and a great many bullocks. Mrs. Tetlow considered. He is not much talked of, which in a duke is a recommendation. Is he old? 36. He came into it at 19 and there were 4 guardians and they all fell out. He is not married. There has been a deal of trouble about that in this county, I am told, and none of it his. Mrs. Tetlow, why do you know all this? Because I am 60 years old and I have a sister at Blythburgh, said Mrs. Tetlow, and if you are asking me whether a duke may sit in that chair, ma'am, the chair does not know the difference, and neither do I, and the tea will be the same tea. He came on a Tuesday, the 19th of October, at 2:30, on a plain bay horse with a groom behind him, and left the horse at the door, and did not send in a card, but stood in the porch with his hat off, while Mr. Ruddock walked the length of the passage to fetch her, which was not what she had expected at all. He was very tall, 6'2" or thereabouts, and lean, and 36, with dark brown hair cut short and pushed back off the forehead, grey eyes set deep, a strong, clean-shaven jaw, and a black tailcoat with a cream waistcoat, and a white cravat tied without any particular art, and boots that had been ridden in for 8 miles across country, and had not been cleaned since he set out. Miss Standish, I am Wenhaston. The society has written to you about me, and I am afraid they have made it sound official. It is not official. They wrote to me in July when the business at Norwich was in the newspapers, and I did not come then, because I did not think you would want a stranger in the house in July. He looked at her directly, which she had also not expected. I have brought nothing, and I want nothing, and if this is a bad afternoon I shall go away and write first, as I should have done. Your Grace, I have been dreading you for a fortnight. Yes, he said. I imagined I was being dreaded. That is why I did not send the card. A card gives a person half an hour to be frightened in, and no way at all to say no. Then you had better come in, said Lavinia, and I shall tell you when you have been here long enough. She took him into the south room, and it went out of her head to be frightened within about 4 minutes, because he walked the length of the shelf, reading the labels with his hands behind his back, and then said, without turning round, 43. Is there a gap? 3 days in the January of the year 96, and 11 in the summer of 1804, and he says why in both places. What does he say? Frost in the first, so hard that the ink froze in the room and he would not write in pencil, because he thought pencil dishonest. And in the second his father's brother died in Norwich, and he was away, and he wrote afterwards that he would not fill in from memory, and would rather have the whole. The Duke turned round. He would rather have the whole, he repeated. I have 409 tenants at Bullcamp, and I employ 2 agents and a surveyor, and not one of the 3 of them would have left it empty. He came back down the room. May I see the year 96, and may I see the chart, and will you tell me at what point I am to be told I have been here long enough? Because I would rather be told than guess. He stayed 2 hours and a quarter. He read the frost and the 11 days and the chart, and he asked 11 questions, and every one of them was a question she had asked herself, which was a novelty so complete that afterwards she could not remember being introduced to the idea that she was talking to a duke. He wanted to know whether the sand and the sea shifted the swallow date earlier or later. He wanted to know whether her Peasenhall row and his Aldringham row diverged more in cold springs or in warm ones. He wanted to know whether a curate's daughter of 15 and a gentleman of 54 had ever disagreed upon a date, and which of them had turned out to be right. And when she said that they had disagreed 3 times and that she had been right twice, he laughed out loud once and then said, "I beg your pardon. That was not a laugh at you." And she said, "I know it was not." And there it was. At the door he said, "I have 30 years of the level of the Blythe at Blytheburg, taken twice a day by 4 different men, and I have never once known what to do with it. It is in a box. If I sent it over, could you tell me whether it is worth anything, and would you say so plainly if it is not? I should think it is worth a great deal, and I shall certainly say so plainly if it is not." "That," said the Duke, "is the most encouraging sentence I have heard this year," and got on his horse and went away east into the flat light with the groom trailing after him. He came again on the 9th of November with the box. There were 9 ledgers in it, and the readings were a disgrace. 3 hands, 2 of them careless, gaps of a fortnight in the year 11, and a change of gauge in the year 6 that nobody had recorded, and that she found in an afternoon by the simple method of noticing that the river had apparently dropped 4 inches overnight and stayed there for 30 years. She wrote it out for him on 2 sheets, with the correction to be applied, and gave it him on the 23rd, and he read it standing in the hall with his gloves still on, and said, 30 years. 30 years, and it was the gauge. Miss Standish, my grandfather's man began this in the year 88, and every man since has copied his predecessor's habits, and nobody has ever once looked at the whole of it laid out. Why did nobody ever look at it entire? Because looking at the whole of a thing is very dull, said Lavinia, and because it is nobody's employment. You pay a man to take the reading. You do not pay anybody to be bored by it afterwards. My father used to say the same about the parish accounts. Then I shall pay somebody. You will not find them, Your Grace. It is not a thing a person does for wages. He stood with his hat under his arm looking at her for a moment, and then said, No, I begin to see that it is not, and went away. In the winter the house had a good deal of Suffolk in it, which surprised her, because she had come there in April, supposing that the parish would take a year to decide about her, and had put by 2 years' patience for the purpose. The parish took until the harvest supper. She had the harvest supper in the barn on the 18th of September, because it had always been had, and she went and sat in it, and did not make a speech, and afterwards Mr. Locke's wife told 3 people that the new lady had eaten the same as everybody else, and had asked Ruddock's sister about her leg. In October she opened the school. It was 2 mornings a week in the old dairy with the copper taken out, and it had 9 scholars in the first month, and 22 by Candlemas, and it took the girls, which the Leston school did not, and she taught it herself on the Tuesday, and Mr. Bramwell took the Thursday, and was better at it than he had any right to be. At Christmas there was a goose from Mr. Locke, and a bottle of something from Mr. Coleridge at Halesworth, with the label torn off, and a note from Mr. Penlow which said that in 33 years he had never before written to a client to wish her joy of an estate, and that she was not to make a habit of putting him to inconvenience. And on the 2nd of January, a letter came from Shelmore Lodge in the round downhill hand. Madam, the portrait came in September. It has been cleaned, and it is in the small drawing room. I did not write at the time, and I shall not explain why not. My mother was 22 in that picture, and I had not seen it since I was a boy, and I had forgotten that she looked like that. I do not withdraw anything I said in your house, since a man who withdraws what he said gets no credit for it from anybody. But I did not come to Aldringham when he was ill in the year 15. And you did not put that to me in Norwich, and your council did not put it to me, and I have been obliged to put it to myself. I am told you are keeping the school there. My uncle would have thought that was the only sensible thing anyone has done in that house since the year 90. Your obedient servant, Osbert Trenholm. She read it aloud to Mrs. Tetlow, who sniffed, and to Miss Forsett, who said, "He is not a good man, but he is not a finished one." And then she put it in the drawer with the other letters, and answered it in 5 lines. And they wrote perhaps twice a year for the rest of his life, and never once mentioned the will again. The county began to talk in February, and it began, as such things do, with an invitation. When Haston had been at Aldringham House 11 times between the 19th of October and the 1st of February. This was known at Blythburgh, at Yoxford, at Leiston, at Saxmundham, and in 3 houses in Ipswich. And the arithmetic had been done by people who had never in their lives done any other arithmetic so carefully. Then his mother came. The Dowager Duchess was 64, upright, in grey, with a face that had spent 40 years declining to be surprised in public. And she came without notice on the 11th of February, in a carriage that filled the sweep, and she stayed 1 hour and 10 minutes. She looked at the chart. She asked what the 2 rows were. She was told. She asked what the small marks meant, and was told that they meant the entries had been taken out of a 9-penny almanac bought at a fair. She looked at that for rather a long time. Then she sat down and said, "Miss Standish, I shall be direct, because I am too old to go round, and you have had enough of people going round. My son has dined out 4 times since Michaelmas, and he has talked about a river gauge at all 4. He is not a talker. He was not a talker at 19 when he had 4 guardians pulling him in 4 directions, and he has not been a talker since. And he has been asked in this county by everybody who has a daughter. And he has been perfectly civil to all of them, and has come home and gone to bed. Now, you know what will be said." "I know exactly what will be said, ma'am," said Lavinia. "It was said in a court at Norwich in July by a barrister who was paid to say it. I have had the worst of it already, and it was printed in the newspapers." "Yes," said the Dowager, "that has occurred to me. It is, in fact, why I came." She turned her head and looked out through the glass, where the martins' nests sat empty under the eaves in the February light, waiting. "There is nothing anybody can find out about you, Miss Standish. It has all been found out. It was found out in public, on oath, by a man whose profession is finding it out, and there was nothing in it but a girl of 15 who was right about a bird. My dear, do you know how rare that is? I have 3 nieces, and I could not say that of one of them, and I could not say it of myself." Lavinia found that she had nothing whatever to say. "I shall tell you what I told my son when he was 24, and wanted to marry a Miss Somebody from Newmarket," the Dowager went on, getting up and shaking out her grey skirts. "I told him that a duchess is looked at for 50 years, and that the only women who survive it are the ones who are interested in something other than being looked at. He did not take my advice at 24. He appears to be taking it at 36, which is the usual interval." She put out her hand. Come to Bullcamp in March and see the herd. He will not ask you. He is afraid of hurrying you, and he will go on being afraid of it until somebody is unkind enough to be plain, and it may as well be his mother. She went to Bullcamp on the 11th of March with Miss Forsett in a hired chaise, wearing the good gown mended and a new bonnet that Mrs. Tetlow had bullied her into. The park is 4 miles round, and the house is what Mrs. Tetlow had said it was, and Lavinia looked at it out of the window as they came up and thought, with perfect clarity and no bitterness at all, that she would not have been let in at the side door of it 2 years ago with a message. The Duke met the chaise himself at the bottom of the steps, which his mother observed from the window above with the liveliest interest. He showed them the herd, and the drainage of the low ground, which had cost £11,000, and was the thing he was proudest of in the world, and the thing nobody had ever wanted to hear about. And Miss Forsett, who had a genius for arithmetic and no reverence whatever, asked him what the return on it was, and he told her, and she said it was 4%, and he had been robbed on the tile, and he stood in the middle of a wet field and argued with a schoolmistress from Yoxford for 20 minutes, and enjoyed himself more than he had at any dinner since Christmas. At the top of the steps, going in, he said quietly to Lavinia, "My mother came to Aldringham last month." "She did. I did not know she was going. I want that said." "I knew you did not," said Lavinia. "She told me so herself in a manner of speaking in her last 4 sentences." "Ah," said the Duke, "then I need not wonder what she said. Miss Standish, may I ask you something that I have no right to ask, and will you answer it as you answered Pringle, which is to say exactly, yes, are you being courted against your will?" She stopped on the step. "No," she said. "Then that is all I shall ask you until the summer," he said, "because you have had 1 year in which everything that has happened to you has been decided by other people, and I am not going to be the 11th of them." And he opened the door for her, and they went in to his mother. Easter fell late that year. The parish came out of the south porch of St. Andrew's into hard, bright sun, and the whole of Aldringham was there, and the Duke of Wenhaston was there, having ridden over for it, which was noticed by every soul in the churchyard, and was intended to be. He stood with her by the porch for perhaps 10 minutes while the parish went past, and Mr. Bramwell shook hands with all of them, and got his surplice caught on the gate, and Mrs. Tetlow stood 2 paces off, with her hands folded exactly as though she were not listening, and Mr. Locke came by with his wife and said, "There's swallows at Snape, ma'am. Tuesday my brother had them." And Lavinia said, "Tuesday the 20th, at Snape, your brother saw them himself." And Miss Locke said, "He did, ma'am, over the water," and she wrote it in the almanac against the church wall with the pencil she kept on a string. And Wenhaston held her prayer book while she did it, and half the parish saw him do it. There was not much doubt in Aldringham after that. She had her own first swallow on the 24th of April at 8:10 in the morning over the horse pond, and her first cuckoo on the 26th in the alders behind the marsh piece, and both of them went into the lower row of the chart in her hand for the first year of the joined record. In June, the fair copy was finished. 241 pages, 2 parishes, 43 years of his and 11 of hers, ruled and checked and honest about its gaps, and bound at Halesworth by an old man who did the work for nothing and would not be argued with. On the title page she wrote what he had told her to write, and then sat looking at it for a long time before she put the ink to it, because it is one thing to be asked to put your name first by a dead man, and another thing to do it. A calendar of the seasons kept at Peasenhall and at Aldringham in the county of Suffolk, being the observations of Lavinia Standish and of Peregrine Danby, Esquire, joined and continued. It went to London by the Ipswich coach on the 2nd of July, with a letter of 4 lines, and the Society's answer, when it came in the autumn, was read aloud in the long glass room to 11 people, including a bookbinder, and Mrs. Tetlow cried and denied it. He asked her on the 22nd of July, which was a year to the day from the sitting at Norwich, and she understood afterwards that he had chosen the date and had waited 9 weeks for it. They were on the terrace at Aldringham. The martins were at their 4th nest with the 2nd brood, and the evening was hot and yellow, and the sea wind had dropped, and Mrs. Tetlow had taken the tray away, and had then found a great deal to do at the far end of the passage. "Miss Standish," he said, "I had not, when I rode over here in the October with a box of Ruined River readings, expected this evening. I have loved you, with what dignity I could manage and with what patience your year required, since the afternoon you told me that nobody is paid to be bored by the whole of a thing, and looked as if you were apologizing for it. I am asking now, upon no other ground than that I have loved you steadily since that afternoon, whether you will do me the honor of becoming my wife. You have known me 9 months. That is not long enough to be in love with anybody, and I shall not press you upon it. I ask only that you consider it in your own time, and answer me upon your own terms. If your answer is no, everything continues exactly as it is, the river ledges stay in your keeping, and the proposal shall never be raised again by me or by my mother, and I shall undertake for my mother." Lavinia stood with her hands on the terrace balustrade. "Your Grace," she said, "may I say 3 things first?" "Say 30. The first is that there will be a great deal said, and not all of it in Suffolk, and some of it will be said to your face by people who cannot be cut. The second is that I keep a school 2 mornings a week in an old dairy, and I shall not give it up, and I shall want one at Bullcamp within the year, and it will take the girls. And the third is that I shall go on with this." She put her hand flat on the almanac lying on the stone. "Every morning, before anything else, wherever I am, and if I am ill, I shall do it in a bad hand, and if we are in London in April, I shall be perfectly wretched and shall say so." "Is that all of it?" "That is all of it." "Then I shall answer them in order," said Wenhaston. "To the first I have been talked of since I was 19, and there are 4 guardians worth of it in the county already, and I have found that the remedy is to live for 30 years and outlast the people talking. To the second, there is a building at the end of the stable range that has been empty since my grandfather's time, and it has a good roof and 11 windows, and I have been trying to think what to do with it for 17 years. To the third," he paused, "to the third, madam, I would ask you to consider that the man who left you that book did it precisely because you would not stop, and that if I asked you to stop I should be undoing the only thing he ever asked for, and I should deserve everything my mother would say to me." The martins went over the terrace 3 times in the silence. "Your Grace," said Lavinia Standish. "I shall." The banns were called at St. Andrew's, Aldringham, on the 3 Sundays of the 5th, 12th and 19th of September, by Miss Bramwell, who got through the first reading with enormous solemnity, and the second with rather less, and who, on the third, having reached the end without a stumble, added, quite unnecessarily and in a voice of pure private triumph, that this was the third time of asking, and the whole parish, which had been holding its breath in the manner of people determined to behave properly in church, let out a sound which the churchwardens afterwards agreed had not been laughter. They were married on the 5th of October, 1819, in the parish church of St. Andrew at Aldringham, which holds perhaps 200 and held, by Mr. Ruddock's count, 261. She was given away by Mr. Penloway, aged 63, who had been asked for the office in a letter of one line and had answered it in one word, and who wore new gloves and shook from the vestry to the chancel step, and was perfectly steady from the chancel step onward. Miss Forsett stood up with her. Mrs. Tetlow sat in the second pew with her keys, having refused 3 separate invitations to sit in the first. Mr. Locke wore a coat. Mr. Coleridge came from Halesworth with his wife and both daughters, and sat where he could see the west door. Mr. Grigson the younger came from Ipswich with a wedding present, which was, when unwrapped, the 16 letters, released at last from the file by a house that never parted with anything, with a note saying that his father would have called it a shocking irregularity, and would have done it himself. The Dowager Duchess wept, briefly, and afterwards attributed it to the draught. Sir Osbert Trenholm sent a letter, and did not come, and the letter said that he thought it better not, and that he wished her well, and that he had had his mother's picture cleaned again, and Lavinia read it in the vestry before she signed the register, and thought that it was, for him, an extremely long journey. They went to Bolcamp for the winter, and she was wretched in London in April exactly as she had promised to be, and said so, and was brought home on the 19th, and had her swallow on the 21st, over the low ground that had cost £11,000. The school at the end of the stable range opened at Michaelmas with 31 scholars, of whom 19 were girls. The school in the old dairy at Aldringham went on with Mr. Bramwell on the Thursday, and the Duchess of Wenhaston on the Tuesday, and it went on for 40 years. And there are men buried in that churchyard who learned their letters from her, and whose granddaughters learned theirs from the school at Bolcamp. The joined calendar was read before the Society in London in the February following the wedding, and printed the year after that, under both names, hers first. She kept it every morning of her life. There is a gap of 5 days in the year 23, when her son was born, and a note in her hand at the foot of the page which says, "I would rather have the whole." And in the June after the wedding, in the middle of a wet week, she went back through the 43 volumes for a thing she had been saving, because she had known where it was since July, and had not let herself go and look. The year 1809, the 12th of May, wind southwest, warm, glass steady. The martins have built a 4th nest under the south eaves, at the east end, where there has never been one in my time nor in my father's. I do not know what they know that I do not. Also, the printer at Ipswich has sent me a letter he has had from a girl at Peasenhall. She copied both sentences into the fair copy on the same line, which was not strictly correct, and which the Society never noticed, and which is in the printed volume to this day. There are stories that begin with a kiss, and others that open upon a vow. Some begin with a knock at a door on a winter night, some with a hired chaise on a gravel sweep, some with a name read out in a stranger's chambers by a man in gold-rimmed spectacles who has been dreading the reading of it. And there are others quieter in the making, and a great deal slower in the arriving, that begin with a girl of 15 at a window in a curate's parlour, with a ninpenny almanac and a bad pen, writing to a printer she has never met to tell him that his page is wrong about a bird, and end, 10 years and 1 court and 2 parishes later, with a woman standing at the same page in a different room with the same hand, correcting nothing, because there is at last nothing in it that wants correcting. Lavinia returned to Aldringham every April for 51 years. She planted a quince against the south wall of the walled ground in the first spring, and ate the fruit of it in her old age. The portrait of the man she never met hangs above the fireplace in the South Library at Bullcamp, where he can see out, which was her arrangement and not the painter's, and beneath it hangs the chart in its frame, with 2 rows to every year. And so, on the warm pale gold October morning of the 5th of October, 1819, in the parish church of St. Andrew at Aldringham, in the county of Suffolk, under a sky the colour of the inside of a shell, Lavinia Standish of Peason Hall, curate's daughter, schoolmistress, keeper of a ninpenny almanac, who had sat still in a stranger's chambers on the 10th of April and heard read aloud the will of a man she had never once laid eyes on, became, by the patient asking of the 5th Duke of Wenhaston, the Duchess of Wenhaston, and remained, for the 51 years that followed and in every printed volume that carries the 2 names, with hers set first, the girl who had been right about the cuckoo.